The wagon wheel splintered with a crack that echoed across the Wyoming plains like a gunshot. And Victoria Edwards felt her heart sink as the entire left side of her modest covered wagon lurched violently toward the dusty ground. She gripped the wooden seat with white knuckles as her horse whinnied in distress, stomping its hooves against the hard, packed earth. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the barren landscape, stretching endlessly in all directions, with nothing but sagebrush and distant mountains to break the monotony. She was 3 days out from Fort Laramie, heading toward her cousin's homestead near Casper, and now she sat stranded in the middle of nowhere with a broken wheel and dwindling water supplies. Victoria climbed down carefully, her long skirts catching on the wagon's edge as she assessed the damage. The wheel had not just cracked but had completely shattered, pieces of wood scattered across the ground like kindling. Her supplies were intact, but without a functioning wheel, she might as well have been anchored to the spot. She was 22 years old, had left Boston 3 months ago after her father's death left her with nothing but debts, and this journey west was supposed to be her fresh start. Now it looked like it might be her ending. She pulled her bonnet lower to shield her face from the relentless sun and considered her options. She could wait and hope someone passed by, but travelers were scarce on this particular stretch of trail. She could try to walk, but she would have to leave most of her belongings behind, and the nearest town was at least 15 miles away according to her last calculations. Or she could attempt to repair the wheel herself, though she had no idea where to begin with such a task. Just as despair began to settle over her like a heavy blanket, Victoria heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the south. She turned, shading her eyes with her hand, and saw a lone rider cresting a small rise about a quarter-mile away. Her first instinct was fear because a woman alone on the frontier was vulnerable in ways that made her stomach clench. But she had no choice but to stand her ground and hope whoever was approaching had some decency in their character. The rider drew closer, and Victoria could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle atop a paint horse, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. As he approached, he slowed his horse to a walk, giving her time to see him clearly. He was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a lean, muscular build that spoke of hard work and long days in the saddle. His clothes were worn but clean, practical ranch wear with leather chaps and a faded blue shirt. Most importantly, his hands were visible and empty of weapons, though she could see a rifle secured to his saddle. "Afternoon, miss," he called out when he was close enough for conversation, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Looks like you have run into some trouble." Victoria straightened her spine, trying to project confidence she did not entirely feel. "My wheel broke. I am afraid I am rather stuck at the moment." The cowboy dismounted with an easy grace and approached the wagon, keeping a respectful distance that she appreciated. He crouched down to examine the shattered wheel, running his fingers over the broken spokes and the damaged hub. His face was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rugged way, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. When he looked up at her, she noticed his eyes were a striking shade of hazel, flecked with gold in the sunlight. "This wheel is done for," he said, stating the obvious but not unkindly. "You will not be going anywhere with it in this condition. Where were you headed, Casper?" "My cousin has a homestead there. I was supposed to arrive in another 4 days." Victoria felt her voice waver slightly and hated herself for it. She had promised herself she would be strong, that she would handle whatever the frontier threw at her. The cowboy stood, dusting off his hands on his pants. "My name is James Morrison. I work on a ranch about 8 miles north of here. We have got a workshop with tools and spare wood. I could take this wheel back, repair it, and have you on your way by tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening. That is quite generous, but I could not possibly impose. Victoria knew she had little choice, but years of Boston propriety were hard to shake. James looked at her with an expression that was both amused and concerned. Miss, you are in the middle of Wyoming territory with no wheel, limited supplies, I am guessing, and the nearest town is a hard day's walk even for someone who knows the territory. This is not an imposition. This is survival. Besides, my boss Cal Miller and his wife Sarah run a decent operation. Sarah will be happy to have another woman around for an evening. Victoria considered his words. Everything he said made perfect sense, and she truly had no other viable options. She could detect no threat in his manner, only straightforward practicality mixed with what seemed like genuine concern. Very well. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I accept your kind offer. Just James is fine. Let me unhitch your horse and gather what you will need for the night. We can leave the wagon here. Nobody will bother it, and if they do, well, it is not going anywhere anyway. He moved toward her horse with confident, practiced movements, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones as he worked the harness free. Victoria gathered a small bag with her essentials, including a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, and what little money she had left sewn into a hidden pocket. She watched James work, noting how gentle he was with her horse, how efficient his movements were. There was something reassuring about his presence, a calm competence that eased some of her anxiety. Within 20 minutes, they were ready to go. James helped her onto his paint horse, then swung up behind her. Victoria stiffened at the intimacy of the arrangement, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his arms coming around her sides to hold the reins. Just hold on, he said quietly near her ear. It is an easy ride, and I promise I will not let you fall. They rode north across the rolling plains, and Victoria found herself relaxing despite the unusual circumstances. James kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the country. He had come west from Missouri 5 years ago when he was 19, worked on various ranches, and had been with the Miller Ranch for the past 2 years. He spoke about the work with genuine affection, describing the rhythm of ranch life, the cattle drives, the hard winters, and the satisfaction of honest labor. "What brought you west, Miss Edwards?" he asked after a while. "Victoria, please, and it is a common enough story, I suppose." "My father died, left me with nothing but debts. My mother passed when I was young. I had no prospects in Boston, so when my cousin Martha wrote saying she and her husband could use help on their homestead, it seemed like the right choice." She found herself being more honest than she had intended, perhaps because there was something about the vast open spaces that made pretense seem pointless. "That takes courage," James said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "Not everyone would be willing to leave everything familiar behind." "Or perhaps I simply had nothing left to lose," Victoria replied, surprised at the bitterness that crept into her tone. "Maybe. But I have seen plenty of folks who had nothing and still did not have the grit to start over." "Give yourself more credit." His words warmed her more than they should have, and Victoria found herself acutely aware of his presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the careful way he guided the horse to avoid the rougher patches of ground. She told herself it was simply gratitude she felt, relief at being rescued from a genuinely dangerous situation. The Miller Ranch came into view as they crested a ridge, spread out in a small valley with a creek running through it. There was a main house built of logs and stone, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals with horses and cattle visible in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and Victoria could see a woman in a blue dress hanging laundry on a line strung between two posts. As they rode into the yard, the woman looked up and waved, calling out something toward the house. A moment later, a tall man with graying hair emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. James guided the horse to a stop near the house and dismounted, then helped Victoria down with steady hands on her waist. "Cal, Sarah, this is Victoria Edwards. Found her stranded about 8 miles south with a busted wheel. I told her we could fix her up and get her back on the road tomorrow evening," James explained. Sarah Miller came forward with a warm smile, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and laugh lines around her mouth. "Of course, you poor dear. You must be exhausted. Come inside and let me get you something cool to drink and some proper food." Cal Miller shook Victoria's hand with a firm grip. "Welcome to our place, Miss Edwards. James here is our best hand with repairs. If he says he can fix your wheel, consider it done." The genuine hospitality overwhelmed Victoria, who had grown accustomed to the cold formality of Boston society. "Thank you all so much. I truly do not know what I would have done if Mr. Morrison had not happened along. Just James, remember," James said with a slight smile that made her heart skip in an unexpected way. "Cal, if you can help me unload her wheel tomorrow morning, I will get started on it right away. Should not take more than a day if the damage is not worse than I think." Sarah took Victoria's arm gently. "Never you mind about all that right now. Come with me and let me show you where you can wash up and rest a bit before supper. James, you make sure you clean up too. You are covered in trail dust." As Sarah led her into the house, Victoria glanced back to see James watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He caught her eye and touched his hat brim again, before turning to help Cal with the horses. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and curtains that let in the afternoon light. Sarah showed her to a small room with a bed covered in a colorful quilt. "This is our spare room. We do not get many visitors, but when we do, we like to treat them proper. There is water in the basin, and I will bring you some fresh towels. Supper will be in about an hour. Nothing fancy, just good ranch cooking," Sarah said. "This is more than generous. I cannot thank you enough," Victoria said, setting down her bag. Sarah paused in the doorway. "Honey, out here we take care of each other because we all know how quick things can go wrong. You would do the same if situations were reversed, I am sure. Now rest up, and we will have a nice visit over supper." Alone in the room, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. The events of the day felt surreal. This morning she had been alone and terrified, stranded with no hope of rescue, and now she was safe in a comfortable home with kind people. And then there was James Morrison, whose hazel eyes and gentle manner had affected her in ways she was trying not to examine too closely. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into a clean dress, and brushed out her long brown hair before pinning it back up. When she emerged from the room, she could hear voices and the clatter of dishes from what must be the kitchen. She followed the sounds and found Sarah at the stove, stirring something that smelled delicious. "Come sit," Sarah invited, gesturing to a chair at the large wooden table. "Tell me about yourself while I finish up here. James said you were heading to Casper." Victoria sat and found herself telling Sarah about her life in Boston, her father's illness and death, the debts that consumed what little he had left, and her cousin's invitation to come west. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering sympathy in equal measure. There was something about the older woman's manner that invited confidence. "And what about you? How did you end up out here?" Victoria asked, wanting to shift the focus away from her own troubles. Sarah's face softened with memory. Cal and I came out from Ohio 20 years ago. We were young and full of dreams about building something of our own. It has not been easy. We lost a child to fever the first winter, nearly lost the ranch twice to harsh weather and bad luck. But we kept at it, and now we have got a good operation going. We employ 4 steady hands, including James, and we make a decent living. "I am so sorry about your child," Victoria said softly. "Thank you, dear. It is an old pain now, but you never really get over something like that. You just learn to carry it." Sarah checked something in the oven and then wiped her hands. But life goes on, and there is still much to be grateful for, including good men like James who work hard and treat people right. There was something knowing in Sarah's tone that made Victoria look up sharply, but the older woman's expression was innocently focused on the stove. Before Victoria could respond, the door opened and Cal entered with James right behind him. Both men had clearly washed up, their faces clean and hair damp. "Something smells wonderful," Cal said, kissing his wife's cheek as he passed. They all settled around the table, and Sarah brought out a meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from her garden. The conversation flowed easily, with Cal and Sarah asking Victoria about the East and telling stories about ranch life. James was quieter, but Victoria found herself intensely aware of him sitting across from her, the way his hands moved as he ate, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. After supper, James excused himself to tend to evening chores, and Victoria insisted on helping Sarah clean up despite the older woman's protests. As they washed and dried dishes, Sarah said casually, "James is a good man. Best hand we have ever had, and we have had a few over the years. He is honest, hard-working, and decent to his core. Does not drink to excess, does not gamble, treats animals and people with respect." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am sure he is all those things. I am grateful he came along when he did." Sarah gave her a long look, but mercifully changed the subject. "Tomorrow, while James works on your wheel, I could use help in the garden if you are willing. Got more weeds than I can keep up with, and it would be nice to have company. I would be happy to help. It is the least I can do after your hospitality." That night, Victoria lay in the comfortable bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance, the occasional nicker of horses, the wind moving through the valley. It was so different from Boston with its city noises and cramped streets. Here there was space and silence, and stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch through the window. She thought about James, about the way he had treated her with such respect and kindness. She thought about his hands, strong and capable, and his voice, low and reassuring. She told herself she was simply emotional from the stress of being stranded, that she would feel differently in the morning. But as she drifted off to sleep, it was his hazel eyes she saw behind her closed lids. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Victoria woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen where Sarah was already preparing breakfast. "Good morning, dear. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks, actually. That bed is wonderfully comfortable." Victoria accepted a cup of coffee gratefully. "Cal and James already headed out to get your wheel. They will drag it back here on a sledge, and then James will get to work on it in the workshop. Should keep him busy most of the day." Sarah set plates of eggs and bacon on the table. "Sit and eat. We will tackle the garden after breakfast." Victoria had never done much physical labor in Boston, but she found she enjoyed working in the garden with Sarah. The older woman taught her how to identify weeds from seedlings, how to hill up potatoes properly, how to check squash plants for bugs. They talked as they worked, and Victoria learned more about ranch life and the challenges and rewards it brought. Sarah had a wealth of stories about the early days, about neighbors who became friends, about the tight-knit community that formed even in this seemingly empty land. Around mid-morning, Victoria heard the sound of hammering from one of the outbuildings. She looked up from her weeding to see smoke rising from what must be the workshop. "That will be James," Sarah said, following her gaze. "Once he starts a project, he does not stop until it is done right. We will bring him some lunch later." As the sun climbed higher and the day grew warmer, Victoria found herself glancing toward the workshop more often than she cared to admit. Finally, when the noon hour approached, Sarah declared they had done enough gardening for one day and went inside to prepare a lunch basket. "Come on, we will take this to James. He forgets to eat when he is working." They walked across the yard to a building Victoria had not paid much attention to before. Inside, it was dim and smelled of wood shavings and metal. James stood at a workbench, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms, his face intense with concentration as he fitted new spokes into the wheel hub. He looked up when they entered, and Victoria saw him smile at the sight of them. "Sarah, you read my mind. I was just thinking I could use a break." He set down his tools and came over, wiping his hands on a rag. "Victoria helped me make this, so you better appreciate it," Sarah teased, handing him the basket. "I am sure I will." His eyes met Victoria's, and there was something warm in his gaze that made her breath catch. "How are you enjoying ranch life so far?" "It is different from what I am used to, but in a good way. The work is satisfying." She gestured to his project. "How is the wheel coming along?" "Better than expected. The hub was not as damaged as I thought, so I just need to replace these spokes and reinforce the rim. Should have it ready by this evening like I promised." He pulled out a sandwich from the basket and took a bite. "This is delicious." Sarah looked between them with barely concealed satisfaction. "Well, I will leave you two to visit while James eats. Victoria, come back to the house when you are ready." Before Victoria could protest, Sarah had swept out of the workshop, leaving them alone. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the sounds of James eating. Victoria walked over to examine the wheel, noting the neat, precise work. "You are very skilled at this." "Had a lot of practice. On a ranch, you learn to fix everything because you cannot always get to town for supplies or help." He finished the sandwich and pulled out an apple. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you really set on going to Casper, to your cousin's place?" His tone was casual, but there was an intensity in his eyes that suggested the question was anything but idle. Victoria felt her heart rate increase. "That is the plan. Why do you ask?" James was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know we just met yesterday and you have no reason to trust anything I say, but there is something I need to tell you, and I hope you will hear me out." "I am listening." "Your wagon wheel did not just break from normal wear. I examined it closely when I went to retrieve it this morning. Someone sawed partway through 3 of the spokes. They did it deliberately, knowing it would fail eventually. You were sabotaged." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "What? That is impossible. Who would do such a thing?" "I do not know, but I have been thinking about it all morning. When did you last stop? Where were you before you camped on the trail?" James set down the apple, his full attention on her. "I stopped at a trading post about 2 days ago, just to get supplies and water. There were a few men there, rough-looking types, but they did not bother me beyond some stares." Victoria tried to remember details, her mind racing. "One of them asked where I was headed, and I told him Casper. He said something about it being dangerous for a woman alone." James's jaw tightened. "Did he seem interested in your wagon, in what you might be carrying?" "I do not know. Maybe. Oh God, James, do you think he did this? That he was planning to rob me when I broke down?" The full horror of the situation hit her, and she felt her knees weaken. James was at her side in an instant, his hand steady on her elbow. "Easy now. You are safe here, and I am not going to let anything happen to you. But I think you need to consider very carefully whether going on to Casper is the best idea. These men, if they were serious about robbing you, might be watching the trail. They might try again." Victoria pulled away, needing space to think. "But I have nowhere else to go. My cousin is expecting me. I have nothing left back east. You could stay here." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond simple practicality. Victoria stared at him, seeing the hope and nervousness in his face. "Stay here, James. I cannot just stay here. I barely know you, and I cannot impose on the Millers indefinitely. It would not be an imposition. Sarah has been talking about needing help with the house and garden. Cal and I have been discussing hiring someone to handle the cooking for the hands during busy seasons. You would earn your keep, have a safe place to live, time to figure out your next move." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "And you would not be putting yourself at risk by traveling alone again. Is this really about my safety, or is this about something else?" Victoria asked, her heart pounding. She needed to hear him say it, needed to know if what she was feeling had any basis in reality. James met her eyes squarely. "Both. Yes, I am worried about your safety. That saw job on your wheel was professional, meant to fail at exactly the worst time in the worst place. Whoever did it is dangerous, but that is not the only reason I am asking you to stay." "Then, what is the other reason?" "Because from the moment I saw you standing beside that broken wagon, looking scared but determined not to show it, something in me just knew. I know that sounds crazy. I know you probably think I am some lovesick fool. But I have never felt this way before, and I cannot just let you ride out of here knowing I might never see you again." His honesty was raw, vulnerable in a way that took courage. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "James, we only met yesterday." "I know. And I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises you are not ready for. I am just asking you to stay for a while. Give us a chance to get to know each other properly. If after a few weeks or months you decide you want to go to Casper or back east or anywhere else, I will personally make sure you get there safely. But please, Victoria, just give this a chance. Give us a chance." She wanted to say yes. Everything in her wanted to say yes. But years of caution and disappointment made her hesitate. "I need to think about this. It is a big decision." "Of course. Take all the time you need. I will have your wheel fixed by tonight either way, and the choice is entirely yours. I just wanted you to know that staying is an option, and it is one I hope you will consider." He smiled, though there was sadness in it. "I should get back to work. Thank you for bringing lunch." Victoria nodded and left the workshop, her mind spinning. She walked without direction, ending up near the creek that ran through the property. She sat on a flat rock and watched the water flow over smooth stones, trying to sort through her emotions. Everything James said made sense. She was in danger if someone really had sabotaged her wagon. But was that the real reason she was considering staying? Or was it because of the way her heart raced when he looked at her? Was it foolish to even consider changing her plans based on feelings that were barely a day old? She thought about Boston, about the life she had left behind. There had been a man there, a banker's son who had courted her properly for 6 months. She had liked him well enough, had even considered accepting when she thought he might propose. But she had never felt about him the way she felt about James after just one day. That terrified her. It was too fast, too intense, too risky. But then again, what did she have to lose? Her cousin's letter had been kind but not exactly warm. Martha had always been more dutiful than affectionate, and her husband was a stranger to Victoria. She would be going from one uncertain situation to another. At least here she already knew she liked the Millers, that the work appealed to her, that the ranch felt more like home than anywhere had in a long time. And James with his gentle hands and honest eyes and the way he made her feel safe and seen all at once. Victoria sat by the creek until the shadows grew long, wrestling with herself. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, she stood and walked back toward the ranch house. She would sleep on it one more night. Tomorrow, when the wheel was fixed and the moment of decision arrived, she would trust her instincts. Sarah had supper ready when Victoria returned, and Cal and James came in from their work tired and hungry. The meal was quieter than the night before, and Victoria caught Sarah watching her with curiosity. After the dishes were cleared, James excused himself again, and Cal went to his office to work on accounts. Sarah invited Victoria to sit on the porch with her while the day faded. "Something is on your mind," Sarah said gently. "Want to talk about it?" Victoria hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "James told me about the wheel, how it was sabotaged. He suggested I might consider staying here instead of going on to Casper." Sarah nodded slowly. "That sounds like James, always thinking about other people's safety. And what did you tell him?" "That I needed to think about it." "And have you thought about it, I mean?" Sarah rocked gently in her chair, her face calm. "I have thought of little else all afternoon." "Sarah, is it crazy to even consider this? I barely know any of you. I have plans to go to my cousin. How can I just change everything based on one day?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars emerge. "Let me tell you something about how Cal and I met. I was working in a restaurant in Ohio, and he came in one evening for supper. We talked for maybe 20 minutes while I served him, and at the end of it, he asked if he could come back the next day. I said yes. He came back every day for a week, and at the end of that week, he asked me to marry him." "A week?" Victoria could not hide her shock. "A week. My parents thought I had lost my mind. My friends said I was making a terrible mistake, but I knew deep in my bones that Cal was the right man for me. So I said yes, and we were married a month later. That was 20 years ago, and I have never regretted it for a single moment." Sarah reached over and took Victoria's hand. "Sometimes when you know, you just know. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that feeling. But what if I am wrong? What if this is just gratitude or relief or some kind of emotional reaction to being stranded? Then you will figure that out in time, and you can adjust accordingly. But honey, if you walk away tomorrow without giving this a real chance, you will always wonder what might have been. Is that something you want to live with?" Victoria thought about that, about the weight of regret, about all the what-ifs that could haunt a person. "No, no, I do not want that." "Then there is your answer." Sarah squeezed her hand and stood. "I am going to turn in. You take your time out here and listen to what your heart is telling you." After Sarah went inside, Victoria remained on the porch, letting the night settle around her. She could hear James somewhere near the barn, could see lamplight in the workshop. He was probably putting finishing touches on the wheel, making sure it was perfect. That was the kind of man he was, someone who did things right, who cared about details, who had stopped to help a stranger in trouble. She stood and walked across the yard toward the workshop, not allowing herself to second-guess the decision that had crystallized in her heart. The door was open, and she paused in the doorway, watching James sand the repaired wheel with careful, even strokes. He looked up and saw her setting down his tools immediately. "Victoria, is everything all right? I want to stay." The words came out rushed, nervous but certain. James's face transformed, hope lighting his features. "You do? You are sure?" "No, I am not sure. I am terrified, actually. This is probably the most impulsive thing I have ever done. but I want to stay and see where this leads. If the Millers will have me, I want to work here and get to know you properly and just see what happens." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly vulnerable. James crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. "They will be thrilled. Sarah has been hoping you would decide to stay since you got here, and I—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I am really glad, Victoria. I promise you will not regret this. I hope you are right." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm against her cheek, and Victoria found herself leaning into the touch. "We will take this as slow as you need. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance to know each other." "I would like that." They stood there in the lamplight, the night quiet around them, and Victoria felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was not how she had planned her life to go, but maybe that was all right. Maybe the best things came from unexpected places, from broken wheels and chance encounters and cowboys with kind eyes. The next morning, Victoria woke with a sense of purpose she had not felt in months. She dressed and went to find Sarah, who was delighted when Victoria explained her decision. "Oh, I am so pleased. Cal will be too. We will work out the details of your position and pay, but for now, just know you are welcome here as long as you want to stay." Cal was equally enthusiastic when they told him at breakfast, immediately discussing tasks Victoria could take over, and how they would convert the spare room into a proper bedroom for her. James listened with a smile that he seemed unable to contain, and Victoria felt her own happiness growing in response. Over the following days and weeks, Victoria settled into ranch life. Sarah taught her how to cook for a large group, how to preserve food, how to manage a household in a place where supplies were not easy to come by. Victoria took over the daily cooking for the ranch hands, learning their preferences and earning their respect with her willingness to work hard and learn. She found satisfaction in the tangible results of her labor, in the full bellies and grateful smiles. But the best parts of her days were the times she spent with James. He was careful to court her properly, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. They took walks in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about the restlessness that had driven him west, about his dreams of eventually owning his own place someday. She told him about her mother's death when she was 12, about trying to care for her increasingly ill father, about the loneliness of Boston society where she had never quite fit in. They discovered they both loved reading, though books were scarce on the ranch. James had a small collection he had accumulated over the years, and they took to reading aloud to each other in the evenings. Victoria found herself falling in love with his voice, with the way he brought characters to life, with the comfortable silence between them as they sat side by side. One evening about a month after Victoria had decided to stay, James asked her to go riding with him. She had been learning to ride properly, no longer needing the wagon, and had come to love the freedom of it. They rode out to a high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, the mountains rising dramatically in the distance. "This is beautiful," Victoria breathed, turning in a circle to take it all in. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. I come here when I need to think or just need some peace." James dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "I wanted to bring you here because I have something to say, and I wanted it to be somewhere special." Victoria's heart began to race. "What is it?" "I know it has only been a month, and by all conventional wisdom, that is not nearly long enough. But Victoria, I have to tell you that I have fallen completely in love with you. I love your laugh and your determination and the way you face every new challenge without complaint. I love how you are kind to the horses and patient with the men and how you make even ordinary days feel special. I love you, and I needed you to know that." Tears filled Victoria's eyes, but they were happy tears. "James, I love you too. I think I started falling for you that first day, and every day since has just made me more certain. I know it is fast, and people might think we are crazy, but I do not care. I have never felt this way about anyone." James cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Can I kiss you, please?" He lowered his head slowly, giving her one last chance to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Victoria's arms went around his neck, and she pressed closer, feeling like she had finally come home. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I want to marry you," James said. "Not today or tomorrow, but soon. I want you to be my wife, Victoria. Will you think about it?" "I do not need to think about it. Yes, James. Yes, I will marry you." His whoop of joy sent birds scattering from nearby trees, and then he was spinning her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Victoria felt desire kindle alongside the love. They were both breathless when they finally pulled apart. "We should probably head back and tell Sarah and Cal," James said, though he seemed reluctant to leave their private meadow. "Probably." Victoria was equally reluctant, but she knew he was right. They rode back to the ranch holding hands whenever the trail was wide enough to permit it, and Victoria felt like she was floating. Sarah and Cal were overjoyed at the news, with Sarah immediately beginning to plan a wedding. "We will have it here at the ranch, of course, maybe in 6 weeks. That will give us time to get word to neighbors and make proper preparations." "Oh, Victoria, I am so happy for you both." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sarah taught Victoria how to sew a proper wedding dress, working in the evenings by lamplight on soft cream-colored fabric that one of the neighboring ranchers' wives had sold them. Victoria made it simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Sarah had saved from her own wedding dress. James worked extra hours to build furniture for the small cabin Cal had offered them to live in, a sturdy structure about a quarter-mile from the main house that would give them privacy while keeping them close to the ranch. They had one scare during those weeks when a stranger came to the ranch asking questions about a woman traveling alone, fitting Victoria's description. James and Cal ran him off with rifles and stern warnings, and for a few days, everyone was on high alert. But the stranger did not return, and eventually they relaxed again, though James made sure Victoria was never alone when she went anywhere beyond the immediate ranch yard. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the Wyoming sky a brilliant blue overhead. Neighbors came from surrounding ranches, and the small community turned out to celebrate. A circuit preacher who happened to be passing through agreed to perform the ceremony, and Victoria stood in the meadow where James had first told her he loved her, surrounded by wildflowers and friends, and pledged her life to the man who had saved her in more ways than one. James looked handsome in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and laughter of the assembled guests. They celebrated with a feast that Sarah and the neighboring women had prepared, with music from a fiddle and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Finally, as the stars came out and the party began to wind down, James took Victoria's hand and led her away to their cabin. Inside, he had lit lanterns that cast a warm glow over the simple but sturdy furniture he had made. There was a bed with a quilt Sarah had gifted them, a table and chairs, a stove for cooking, and shelves for their few belongings. It was not much, but it was theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morrison," James said, pulling her close. "I like the sound of that." Victoria reached up to kiss him, and this time there was no need to hold back. They came together with the passion they had been carefully banking for weeks, learning each other's bodies with eager hands and whispered endearments. James was gentle and patient, making sure Victoria's first time was filled with more pleasure than pain, and afterward they lay tangled together, hearts still racing. "I love you," Victoria whispered against his chest. "I love you too. I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." James pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and Victoria felt complete in a way she never had before. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The work was hard, and the Wyoming winters were brutal. They faced a blizzard in December that killed some of the cattle and left them snowed in for 2 weeks. In the spring, there was a fire that destroyed one of the barns, though thankfully no people or animals were seriously hurt. Through it all, James and Victoria leaned on each other, their love growing deeper with each obstacle they overcame together. Victoria discovered she was pregnant that summer, and the joy on James's face when she told him made her heart swell. They spent evenings talking about the baby, making plans, wondering if it would be a boy or girl. Sarah was thrilled at the prospect of a baby on the ranch, already knitting tiny clothes and giving Victoria advice. The baby, a healthy boy they named Joseph, arrived on a cold February morning after a long night of labor. James stayed by Victoria's side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, offering encouragement even when she was too exhausted to respond. When the midwife finally placed their son in Victoria's arms, she looked at James through tears of relief and joy and saw her own emotions reflected on his face. "He is perfect," James whispered, touching Joseph's tiny hand with one finger. "He looks like you," Victoria said, noting the baby's dark hair and the shape of his nose. "Poor kid." But James was smiling, unable to take his eyes off his son. Joseph's arrival brought new rhythms to their life. Victoria juggled caring for an infant with her work on the ranch, though Sarah, and even some of the ranch hands pitched in to help when needed. James was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, teaching him about the ranch as soon as Joseph was old enough to understand. When Joseph was 2, Cal and Sarah decided to officially make James a partner in the ranch. They had no children of their own to pass it on to, and James had proven himself invaluable over the years. The transition was gradual, with Cal teaching James the business side of running a ranch, but it secured their future in a way that brought immense relief. "We are building something here," James said to Victoria one evening as they watched Joseph play with wooden blocks James had carved. "Not just for us, but for him and any other children we might have. This is our legacy." Victoria, who was pregnant again though she had not yet told James, smiled. "Speaking of other children," his head whipped around, eyes wide. "Really, are you sure?" "Very sure." She laughed at his expression, at the way he jumped up and pulled her into his arms, careful of her stomach. "Another baby. Victoria, this is incredible." He kissed her soundly, then dropped to his knees to press his ear against her still flat belly. "Hello in there, little one. Your papa cannot wait to meet you." Their daughter, Julia, arrived that autumn, and if possible, James fell even more in love with Victoria watching her with their children. She was patient and playful, stern when needed but mostly full of laughter. Their little cabin sometimes felt cramped with 4 of them, so James built an addition, giving them more room and a separate bedroom for the children. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Joseph grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. Julia was spirited and fearless, climbing trees and pestering the ranch hands with endless questions. When Victoria was 30, she gave birth to their third child, a son they named Matthew, who proved to be a perfect blend of his siblings' personalities. Cal passed away peacefully in his sleep when Victoria and James had been married for 10 years. They all mourned him deeply, but took comfort in knowing he had lived a full life and had been surrounded by people who loved him. Sarah stayed on in the main house, becoming grandmother in truth if not blood to James and Victoria's children. The ranch was renamed Morrison Ranch, though they always kept a sign honoring Cal's memory. As their children grew, James and Victoria made sure they understood the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the beauty of the land they called home. Joseph took naturally to ranching, while Julia showed an interest in the business side, keeping accounts with a precision that impressed everyone. Matthew was the social one, making friends easily and charming everyone he met. When Victoria was 38, Sarah fell ill with pneumonia and did not recover. Her loss was devastating, but she had lived long enough to see Joseph, now 16, take on real responsibilities on the ranch. She had been there for Julia's 13th birthday and Matthew's 10th. She died knowing the ranch would continue in capable hands, surrounded by the family she had helped create. After Sarah's funeral, as they stood on the porch of the main house looking out over the land, James pulled Victoria close. "You ever regret it, staying here instead of going to Casper?" Victoria looked at him in genuine surprise. "Never. Not once. James, you gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose, love beyond anything I imagined possible. How could I ever regret that? Sometimes I still cannot believe that broken wagon wheel brought you to me. Best piece of luck I ever had." He kissed her temple, and Victoria leaned into him, feeling the same contentment she had felt the first night she decided to stay. "It was not luck," she said softly. "It was fate. We were always meant to find each other." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and satisfaction. Joseph married a young woman from a neighboring ranch, and they built their own cabin on Morrison land. Julia, surprising everyone, decided she wanted to go to school in Cheyenne to study business, and though it was hard to let her go, James and Victoria supported her dreams. Matthew showed signs of becoming a skilled horse trainer, working with animals in ways that seemed almost magical. When Victoria was 45, she became a grandmother for the first time when Joseph and his wife welcomed a son. Holding her grandson for the first time, watching James's face as he looked at this new generation, Victoria felt the circle complete. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. On their 25th wedding anniversary, James took Victoria back to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. It looked much the same as it had all those years ago, wildflowers blooming in profusion, mountains rising in the distance. They were older now, with lines on their faces and gray in their hair, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "Thank you," James said, taking both her hands in his. "For what?" "For staying. For taking a chance on a cowboy who fell in love with you at first sight. For building this life with me. For giving me children and love and more happiness than any one man deserves." His voice was thick with emotion. Victoria felt tears stream down her face. "Thank you for stopping to help a stranded woman with a broken wagon, for seeing something in me worth fighting for loving me every single day for 25 years. James, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." He kissed her there among the wildflowers, and it was like coming full circle, back to the beginning but with the weight of 25 years of love and life between them. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, And Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ranch continued to thrive under their stewardship. Joseph proved to be a capable rancher, bringing new ideas while respecting the traditions James and Cal had established. Julia returned from Cheyenne with a business degree and a young lawyer husband, and together they helped modernize the ranch's operations while preserving its heart. Matthew's work with horses attracted buyers from across the territory, adding another revenue stream. When Victoria turned 50, James organized a surprise party that brought together family, friends, and neighbors from across the region. As she looked around at the gathering in their barn, decorated with lanterns and flowers, filled with people she loved, Victoria felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was the life she had built from the ashes of loss and desperation. This was the family she had created with the man she loved. This was home. James pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor as a fiddler struck up a waltz. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Morrison?" "Always," she replied, moving into his arms as naturally as breathing. They danced as they had on their wedding day, though their steps were perhaps a bit slower now, their bodies more familiar with age. But the feeling was the same, that sense of perfect rightness, of two people who belonged together. "You remember what you said to me that night in the workshop?" James asked softly. "When you told me you wanted to stay, I said I was terrified," Victoria recalled, "that it was the most impulsive thing I had ever done." "Best impulse you ever had," James said with a grin. "Best impulse I ever had," Victoria agreed, reaching up to kiss him as their children and grandchildren looked on with smiles. Years later, when they were both in their 60s and had handed over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch to their children, James and Victoria would sit on the porch of their cabin in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. They had lived through so much together. Hard winters and dry summers, economic ups and downs, the joys of watching their children grow and their grandchildren being born. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation everything else was built upon. "Tell me again about the day we met," Victoria would say, even though she had heard the story hundreds of times. And James would smile and take her hand and tell her about riding across the plains and seeing a woman standing beside a broken wagon, about knowing immediately that his life was about to change, about being terrified she would say no when he asked her to stay. "But you said yes," he would always finish. "You took a chance on us, and look what we built." Victoria would look out at the ranch that bore their name, at the home they had created, at the legacy they were leaving for their children and grandchildren, and she would squeeze his hand and say, "Best decision I ever made." On a spring morning when Victoria was 68 and James was 71, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with their family gathered around. There were children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren now, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. As Victoria looked at all of them, she tried to imagine what her life would have been like if that wagon wheel had not broken, if James had not ridden by, if she had not been brave enough to stay. But she could not imagine it. This was her life, the only one that mattered. The broken wagon had not been a disaster but a gift, bringing her to exactly where she needed to be. That evening, as the family drifted away and quiet settled over the ranch once more, James and Victoria sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. "You think we get another life after this one?" Victoria asked dreamily. "I do not know," James replied honestly, "but if we do, I will find you again. Wherever you are, whatever life you are living, I will find you. Promise. Promise." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together just as they always had. Their love story had started with a broken wagon wheel on a Wyoming plain, but it had become something far greater, something lasting and true, something worth every risk she had taken to stay. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night settled around them, Victoria closed her eyes and smiled, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living the life she was always meant to live. The cowboy had fixed her wagon all those years ago, but in doing so, he had fixed so much more. He had given her a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that would last not just a lifetime but for all eternity. And that was more than enough. That was everything.